Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Achates Live on Tuesday, the 30th of June. This session is brought to you in partnership with Arts Council England, and we're very happy to have them with us today. I am Kerry Isles, the Executive Director of Achates Philanthropy, and your host for today's session. Achates is a creative consultancy with a holistic approach to fundraising. We take our name from Greek and Roman mythology. Achates was the close friend and loyal advisor to Aeneas. We think our name pretty neatly describes our relationships that we offer with the cultural sector. We set up Achates Live to support the sector, bringing fundraisers together to discuss key topics and also to enable you to help each other. At Achates, we always say we don't have all the answers, but we do need to have an overview of the cultural sector, and we try to use this in a supportive way. Our live stream started out life as a series of workshops in conjunction with the Old Vic Theatre in London. COVID-19 closures meant that we had to move the series online, as we felt it was important to continue our support of the sector through the challenges that the crisis has presented to all of us. Today's session, Philanthropy Insights, is brought to you in partnership with Arts Council England. This session is very much focusing on the philanthropy work that they're doing at the Arts Council. I would like to welcome and say hello to Claire Titley, Director of Philanthropy and the South West.
Hi, Kerry.
Hello, Claire. And to Helen Cooper, Senior Manager of Philanthropy and Visual Arts.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here with you today.
Lovely to have you with us. We are also delighted to be joined at the end of our session by our partners, the Achates Philanthropy Prize today. And today with the Achates Philanthropy Golden Nugget is dance producer and Achates Philanthropy Foundation trustee, Sarah Maguire. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Lovely to have you with us. As ever, we have our Director of Development, Kane Moore, hosting the chat on YouTube today and fielding your questions. I've seen quite a lot of you saying hello to Kane as you've joined the chat this afternoon, so do keep that conversation going. We do like to stimulate conversation. No one wants to live in an echo chamber, so do keep that coming. We will be bringing your questions to Claire, to Helen and to Caroline later on in the session. Just to say, all information is current as of today, the 30th of June. So if you're watching this stream at a later date, please do bear in mind that responses are changing as the situation continues to develop. So information is current as of today, Tuesday, the 30th of June. Without further ado, I'm going to go over to our director, Caroline McCormack, to introduce the subject to you. Over to you, Caroline.
Thanks so much, Kerry, and what a pleasure it is to be able to welcome our very special guests today. We're really grateful to be able to have Claire and Helen and Sarah with us, and I know that many of you are really looking forward to the opportunity to ask some questions later on. But before we dive in, I'd like to just really start to think about the idea of philanthropy, and of course it's an idea that, as you all know, is very close to our own hearts. Here at Achates, we've long championed the value of philanthropy as not only a measure of financial success, but also as a barometer of our relationship with our audiences. It was, in fact, this belief that the value of the relationship with our audiences is so important that led us to launch the Achates Philanthropy Prize 5 years ago. The prize is now managed and led by the independent Achates Philanthropy Foundation, of which Sarah is a trustee, along with myself and a number of other people. And the slot at the end of these Achates Lives, the Achates Philanthropy Prize Golden Nugget, is really a few words of wisdom that reflects the thinking that's going on in the foundation about championing philanthropy. We look forward to updating you in the next few weeks regarding the role the prize will be playing this year in response to the COVID-19 crisis. So why does this matter? Well, we think it matters because that whilst it might be the right of the artist not to think about the audience whilst they're making work, the role of the arts organisation is to both curate and connect. And it is both of those elements that's so critical, and our responsibility to respond and to listen to our audiences, their interests and their needs. And we also believe in John Berger's idea that culture belongs to and is the responsibility of us all. As we discussed at our last session, case in point, 2 weeks ago, we've seen organisations who are keenly aware of their purpose in relation to their audiences be able to pivot and respond most nimbly to their needs. Whilst we cannot unfortunately say that as state funding gradually declines, that we can be sustained by the growth in philanthropy or indeed voluntary income more broadly alone, as even though the impressive 8% growth to 445 million, which is catalogued in the most recent 2019 Private Investment Culture Survey shows, this is not adequate to make up for that decline. And of course, one of the things that we all know, and I'm sure we'll be talking about in due course, is the fact that that income is not equally distributed. And this is without doubt one of the reasons why dynamism, although I'll never forgive the Arts Council for choosing that word, which I absolutely cannot say, is one of the key pillars of the new ACE strategy, Let's Create. These issues are critical to all of us, and it's why we so welcome the creation of the role of the Director of Philanthropy at Arts Council and Claire's appointment to it in 2014, with Helen joining a couple of years ago. I've had the pleasure to partner with BOP Consulting over the last 6 years. I can't really believe it's quite that long, but for 6 years, we've been supporting and evaluating initially the Catalyst Arts and then the Catalyst Evolve programme, and the more than 500 arts organisations that have participated in them. And that's been a tremendous education for me, meeting and working with organisations of all sizes and learning about the challenges that they've faced as they've sought to grow that voluntary income base. The final report of the programme comes out next month, and I know that it will be invaluable to you all. And Claire and Helen will be drawing on that and many other sources from their work to share with you today. So as you can imagine, I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to welcome Claire now, along with Helen, to share some of their insights and the outcomes from the Arts Council commissioned philanthropy projects and the learning we can all take from them during the current situation as we start to think about how the sector recovers. Claire, Helen, welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks very much for that introduction. And as Helen said, it's great to be here with everybody, even if it is this rather odd setup in which I can't see who's engaging with us right now, but it's really fantastic to have everybody join us. And it's a real pleasure for us to share some of our philanthropy insights from the projects which are either ongoing at the moment or have come to a conclusion. And I think Helen would probably agree with me. It's fair to say that January to March this year were already incredibly busy for us both in terms of the philanthropy work. And then lockdown happened, which meant the whole of Arts Council not only ended up, like many of you, working from home, but then we also shifted our work and shifted our focus and attention on supporting the sector in response to the COVID-19 crisis. And we wanted to ensure that individuals and organisations were able to access the funding that they needed to refocus, to deliver work or stabilise, rethink and plan for the future. And so we know that demand far outweighs the availability of our funding and will not be enough for some organisations. But as we've said previously, there is a real importance of this sort of mixed model of funding from public, private and earned. And as Caroline said in her introduction, philanthropy will never be able to fill the gaps from public or earned. And the irony, of course, is that since I've joined Arts Council in 2014, and I can't believe it's been 6 years, but since I've joined in 2014 and for a few years before that, our focus was very much on supporting the sector to diversify its model of funding and to grow income from contributed and earned in order to become more resilient. But of course, those organisations which would be considered a success are now the ones facing significant need because of those income sources drying up or reducing. And so together with making that funding available through all of the emergency funds, and our website has a lot of information about the emergency funding that we've made, and we'll be announcing some more funding announcements soon. But colleagues across Arts Council have been listening to the sector and talking to other funders, government, local authorities. And we're really keen to hear from you today about our fundraising philanthropy work, your observations, ideas and questions. So once we finish talking, and we've got a lot to get through, so we'll try and kind of speed things up and get through as much as we can. But we're really keen to hear questions, and I know Kane and Kerry-Ann will sort of go through monitoring those questions and play them back to us. But I just thought it was important to start by recognising that the fundraising landscape has shifted dramatically, and so where some of these projects that we're talking about actually concluded long before COVID-19 was ever a thing in this world, and actually how important it is to recognise that what we have to say has this kind of COVID-19 lens on, and what learning can be applied in this new normal as we start to kind of stabilise and rethink where the organisation goes. But I think it's also important to recognise that we'll need to find new ways, and fundraising is hard, and we're going to have to work even harder to raise those funds. So I think what we'd like to do is to share some of our findings, but also actually play acknowledgement to those organisations that have been looking to do things differently in the last few months. And we know that the impact of COVID-19 has been felt by different communities, staff, beneficiaries, and what works for one organisation might not work for another. And so how sharing the information, peer support, and looking at how others are responding can really help. And there's been a great number of stories coming through about how organisations are adapting, flexing, collaborating, how loyal donors and audiences are, how organisations are generating new audiences and supporters due to a greater reach or refocus of their work. First Sight, an organisation that we support as a national portfolio organisation, so an organisation that receives regular core funding, has been, well, actually they were one of the first organisations to respond to develop creative activity packs, and have had an international licence request in order for that work. We've seen organisations open up their kitchens to provide food for vulnerable people and communities, or organisations working with other social care providers to ensure creativity reaches those households where access to digital is limited. So some of those organisations have successfully raised funds via digital platforms. Some have experimented or actually had to quickly develop an online visibility because they didn't have anything before. And I think what's clear is the link between communications and fundraising is getting ever closer. And this will be really important going forward as we start to see how fundraising and income is influenced by consumer behaviour and choices over the coming months. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our Catalyst work, and Helen is going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing to try and raise the level of philanthropic support for arts and culture, and also some of the work that we've supported on decision science and some of the innovations in terms of fundraising that we can share with you today. So I wanted to share with you some more on Catalyst Evolve, and we were hoping for the evaluation to have been launched by now, but unfortunately that was one of the casualties of the current situation. It got pushed back to sort of next month in terms of publication. So I guess this is a little bit of a teaser or trailer in terms of some of the findings coming through. For those of you that aren't aware, Catalyst Evolve was a programme that we initiated in 2016, and it was a £17.5 million programme to build capacity and match funding for the sector. And there were 139 organisations that were successful. We very much focused the support on small to medium-sized organisations because we recognised and heard from the sector that's where the greatest need was for that work. And there were three aims really of the programme. So to develop, support organisations to develop that skills, those skills and their capacity to raise funds from private income, and then sort of build that knowledge and share that good practice within the sector. So of the 17.5 million, about 5 million was directed at building capacity. So that was investment in systems, that was investing in training for board members or staff. For some organisations, it was about buying in some expertise to help them develop case for supports, that kind of thing. And then about £12.5 million was available for matched funding. So that was about organisations approaching donors, applying for funding, and being able to say that Arts Council would match their donation pound for pound, which, as I'm sure you'll know, is a real incentive for driving income. So of the money available for matched funding, the programme came to a conclusion at the end of August 2019. So it was a 3-year programme. And over the course of those 3 years, about 90% of the funding was drawn down of the available amount, which actually is, we were really pleased with that level of funding. And 71% of the organisation that were successful raised their fundraising targets, which, considering these were organisations that maybe didn't have that much experience of fundraising, and sort of some were actually going from quite a limited base level, that was really successful in our view. Now, there's some great stories coming through from organisations, and the evaluation will have more case studies that you can explore and find out how organisations undertook their fundraising. But I just wanted to share a few sort of headlines, if you like. And actually, for those of you that have sort of followed our Catalyst work, this followed on from Catalyst Endowment and Catalyst Arts Programme. And many of the findings that came through on the previous Catalyst Arts evaluation still stand for this work. Many of those findings and outcomes around organisations are more successful if they can embed a fundraising culture within the organisation. And I've talked in the past about kind of from the boardroom to the box office to the barista. Now, some organisations will be building based, some organisations won't. And coming back to what I said earlier, different situations will resonate, will mean something for different organisations. But many of those organisations that sought to embed fundraising and actually have those fundraising conversations at board level with their employees, with their volunteers, actually saw a greater level of success in their fundraising. And there was one finding that stood out for me, which was in relation to board members and trustees. 83% of organisations that took part in the programme stated their trustees were now confident in fundraising. So that was a really interesting finding that stood out for me, because we know that has been a particular barrier to fundraising in the past. There was a real importance of developing a case for support and being very clear about the objectives are understood across the organisation, relevant to the mission and vision of the organisation. And 91% actually reported a greater confidence in fundraising across the organisation as well. So that was great. I've talked previously about recruitment and how increasing fundraising skills across the organisation is important, but also investing in training for organisations. And what Catalyst allowed for was when organisations that maybe have a limited amount of reserves it can be very difficult to make a case to spend money on training or investment in systems when actually you're not going to see that return overnight. It is going to take a longer time. So that was really great that the programme allowed organisations to invest in training and investing those skills development for their staff. And what was really key that came through was what was really valued by participants was developing the peer support networks, and how important it was to share good practice, to share some of the challenges, and actually have some of those honest conversations within a network of other fundraisers or other individuals within a smaller organisation who fundraising wasn't their only task, but many other tasks as well. So that really came through as a strong provision for the cohort, as well as using that match funding as a way to incentivise additional giving, whether that was giving from trusts and foundations or individuals. And actually 68% reported improved relationship management with donors, which is great. It will be interesting to see if we ask these questions in maybe a year's time, how that has changed. And so I just wanted to also say, before I hand over to Helen, because I've probably talked for enough now, and hopefully there's lots of questions coming through as well, and we'll have time, how important it is for us to make sure that we've got time to hear stuff coming through. So I guess just wanted to also consider the longer term impacts, because this evaluation looked at a programme over 3 years, but what we do know is many organisations were putting in plans, legacy fundraising campaign plans, for instance, and so we're not really going to feel the impact of that work for several years. But the evaluation will provide that immediate kind of snapshot of what has been achieved in the 3 years, and there will be that bank of case studies from some of the participant organisations that you'll be able to access next month as well. So Helen, shall I hand over to you to talk more about some of our work with Beacon and Management Centre and our PIC survey?
Sure, thank you, Claire. So I'm just going to talk about those 3 things that Claire mentioned, and we're already starting to think about future private investment in culture surveys. And this is a piece of research that we commit as Arts Council England to doing every couple of years. And so the last one was published in July 2019. It will be, as Claire says, really interesting to measure and to monitor how things are progressing in the coming years during this period, because there's just so much that's unknown at the moment. But there was good news last year, and as Caroline referred to earlier, private investment grew by 8% between 2015 and 2018. And the total private investment in culture in that year was 545 million. 99 million came from businesses, the majority, or 237 million, from individuals, and 209 million from trusts and foundations. So Caroline also talked about some of that imbalance. We know that the predominant wealth is created predominantly in the capital in London, and that London-based organisations do account for 66% of the private investment across the arts and cultural sector. I've gone old school and I have a piece of paper beside me. It's very unusual. It feels strange. We will be, of course, really interested in seeing how people's attitudes towards private investment change in the sector in the coming years. But when we ran this survey last year, 51% of respondents expected their total income to grow over the next 3 years. And that would have been primarily driven by increases in earned income and private investment. And 61% of survey respondents thought that the lack of in-house capacity and time would hold their organisations back in their private fundraising aspirations. So I'm just going to scoot across these 3 projects because I know there'll be lots and lots of questions coming through, and we can go into more detail over time. But just to say that everything I'm talking about is all available online as well. So you can find the full private investment and culture survey for last year and previous years on the Arts Council England website. You can find out more about the work that we're doing with Beacon Collaborative on the Beacon website, which is Beacon Collaborative. I'm going to try and find it, and I've probably lost it now. beaconcollaborative.org.uk. And then you can find more about our decision science work with the Management Centre at decisionscience.org.uk as well. So just to mention Beacon Collaborative, what Claire was talking about in terms of Catalyst is really about thinking about how we make the ask for private investment, how we do fundraising, and that's on the demand side. So our work with Beacon Collaborative is really about thinking about the philanthropy sector, the supply of philanthropy, where it comes from, what we know about it, and how we can grow it. So just to quote from about Beacon, it's an alliance of partners across the philanthropy sector with the collective goal to support a cultural change in giving amongst the wealthy in the UK. So over the coming years, they would like to see at least £2 billion a year more in high net worth giving. So our investment is really aiming to grow that, a proportion of that, to contribute to the arts and cultural sector as well. The coronavirus crisis obviously demands a united and collaborative approach between philanthropists, government and civil society to solve some of the most pressing challenges that we've ever experienced. But we do know, because of Beacon's research and work, they were about to produce a conference and launch these 3 reports just at the beginning of lockdown. And the 3 research papers are online on their website that I mentioned earlier. So we can, there's one called Collaborating for a Cause, How Cause-Related Networks Can Lead to More and Better Giving, and that was produced in partnership with New Philanthropy Capital. It covers the vital role of knowledge networks to support donors to give effectively. So for example, there's an environmental network. There are networks of organisations that give specifically to women's charities. And so it helps philanthropists understand the sector that they want to invest and contribute to better, to help them think about how they might best place their donations. The Giving Experience, which is another report, considers overcoming the barriers to giving amongst the wealthy in the UK. And this was produced in partnership with the Institute of Fundraising, who are also one of our sector support organisations, along with Cause 4 for their arts fundraising and philanthropy programme. So this report considers how fundraising organisations can engage more and better with wealthy donors as partners in social change, and what might inspire people who are not currently giving to start their giving journey, and what might encourage and incentivise people who do give to give more and to probably a more varied base of organisations. And the final of the 3 reports is called Giving Voice to Philanthropy. And this is highlighting how philanthropy contributes to transformational change across society, and reflects on how best to encourage more giving as well, and to celebrate existing philanthropists. And there's been a growth.
Sorry, I've interrupted you, Helen, sorry. But also what we have asked Beacon to ensure is that that commitment to diversifying donors as well, because what we're aware is the majority of philanthropy is aimed at, or well, as you said, the wealth is created in London, and a lot of that wealth stays in London. So we're also looking at how that philanthropy is increased, and commitment from individuals to outside of London, but also to diversify the donors and encourage greater level of support from other communities. So that's also linked to another project that we've been doing, or that we've just committed to do, called Give Black. Did you want to say a little bit about that, Helen?
Well, it's just underway, but we're really delighted to be supporting Jazz Refreshed in this research, which is connected to Black giving circles, but doing research into how diverse-led organisations, particularly given the Black Lives Matter movement and Black-led organisations, are in receipt of donations, and how to stimulate and encourage more Black and people of colour giving circles in organisations across the UK, not necessarily just in London. And there's also another piece of work, I suppose, that we've got our eye on, which is around place-based giving there, isn't it? And having produced the Cultural Cities Inquiry last year, thinking about how organisations can collaborate better in places for the benefit of the broad arts and culture community and people in those places as well. Is there anything you want to say on that now, Claire?
I think should we ask if there's any questions coming?
I think it's time for me to come in with my questions, if I may, Claire. Absolutely. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you both so much for that insight into the breadth and scope of your work. I think it's quite staggering, the sheer scope of what's being undertaken. Helen, just to pick up on where you were just now, and to say it's really fabulous to see that work in terms of Black Lives Matter. And I just want to mention that our next Achates Live in a fortnight's time is with Battersea Arts Centre, with Roundhouse and with Tourette's Hero, looking at retaining a commitment to diversity. It's such an important issue, so really glad to hear that work's continuing. I also really just want to respond to everything you've both said. We always, in this session, try to pay tribute to different people who've made a different contribution to the cultural sector. And I think it's really important that today we acknowledge and pay tribute to all the remarkable arts philanthropists of all sizes across the country. We're going to be looking to them all for our support in the months and years ahead. And thank you for being with us. I'd also just want to say that those of you who aren't yet familiar with the reports that Helen was referring to there, including the Private Investment in Culture, the BOT report, the Beacon Research, etc., do go and have a look. The Private Investment in Culture survey is an absolute mainstay of all the work we do every day. It gives you such a remarkable insight into the landscape nationally. So really do go and check those out. To put a question to you both, if I may, perhaps, Claire, I'll start with you. You made a really interesting point at the beginning of the session, talking about how the Catalyst Arts initially, and then Catalyst Evolve, was very much about trying to grow voluntary income. But actually, as we've talked about, one of the things that's happened is that some of the organisations that were really growing, not only in terms of their voluntary income, but in terms of their private income generation, have been badly hit as a result of COVID-19. And whilst we hope that will change, it may inhibit people from thinking about developing in both these areas. And I wondered what you might say to organisations who are feeling nervous about continuing to try and grow those income areas as they go forward.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a lot to draw on in terms of coming through the evaluation, the research, and actually I've been anecdotally hearing that a number of organisations and individuals have used this time where they've maybe had a little bit more time to do some of that reading, to do some of that reflection work, and then incorporate that into their forward plans. In terms of earned income, and Helen and I sort of sit within a directorate at Arts Council, which is part of the Enterprise and Innovation team. And so our work is firmly on philanthropy, but we also incorporate some of our work into earned income and other areas in relation to monetizing content and things like that. So I think anecdotally, we're actually hearing that some of those organisations that have opened, and actually some organisations have continued to stay open, and those that have opened recently have actually experienced higher than planned sales in terms of retail, cafe, bar. And I think it seems that the people that are attending are going to the museums that are open, and the heritage places are actually kind of spending their money and have maybe missed spending the money and buying takeout coffees, and perhaps enjoying having somebody else prepare their lunch for them once. So actually the spend has, we've noticed, has anecdotally increased. I think businesses outside of the city centres have also noticed that, particularly those clustered in the suburbs or residential areas. But it's how to sustain that, I think, as more and more things open up. We've heard it is hard to monetize digital content. There's been a wealth of digital content, either new content or existing content provided. Some organisations have used that as an opportunity to incorporate and ask successfully. Some organisations have chosen to just make that available freely. So I think there's no sort of one kind of prescription that we can write out for organisations. They kind of need to find what works for their communities, what works for their staff. I think what's important is following the government guidelines on reopening, and how you can use your spaces as safe as possible, making people feel that they are safe, that spaces are accessible, welcoming, and looking at utilising different spaces if you are building based, so looking at outdoor spaces as well. I think
sorry, I was just going to interrupt to say it's an interesting moment. You've talked about the catalyst, different stages as Arts Council, and do you think now is sort of the moment where people are in that reimagining stage now, and that the creativity that we're all going to need, and which you referred to, we're all going to think about new ways of generating voluntary or earned income? Are you starting to see that momentum happening now?
Yeah, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, about communications and fundraising needing to go much more kind of hand in hand as well. And I think what we've seen is how new audiences have been generated, and it's how an organisation is communicating the impact that they're making. And we all know how, if you communicate the impact that you're having on your organisation, that can generate an emotional response in people, how that is more beneficial to raising funds. So it's just really kind of looking at ensuring that you're hitting those kind of basics in terms of communicating message, developing your case for support, and listening to your audience and being available. I think there's some really interesting work that we committed to. Helen trailed it in terms of the decision science work. And there's more information available on decisionscience.org.uk, which is a website that has a wealth of information on there. But just how you can change the messages in the space that you have, and what, by changing those messages, how that generates a different level of response from people. And we've used this in retail for years, in visual merchandising, and how people move around a supermarket or move around a store. And we've seen the wider charitable sector use this in their appeals, emergency appeals and things like that. I think the arts and cultural sector has been a little bit behind the curve on that, but that's where the investment that we made in the decision science work has hopefully kind of allowed for more arts and cultural experience to be able to be shared, so the sector can draw on that as well.
I think that's so well put, and I think there's many things there we completely agree with. It's really fascinating, isn't it? I mean, obviously I've had the chance to have a preview of the forthcoming final Catalyst Evolve report, and case study after case study, you just see the link between fundraising and communications. And of course, we all know that fundraising and communications together are what makes a campaign and how one engages an audience, but it really is revealed in the document. I do urge people to look at it. Claire, obviously one of the challenges is, as we've talked about, and Helen, I'm sure you might want to come in on this as well, is with regards to the fact that, of course, no voluntary income is distributed equally and is reflecting of the different circumstances regionally. And in fact, in the original Catalyst reports, we demonstrated, I think, Bob proved that there is a hierarchy, which is size of organisation, regionality, whether you have your own art form, then venue, whether you have your own data, etc. And I think that's really fascinating. Would you say that from the work that you've done, philanthropy is valuable to everyone? And is that value demonstrated only economically?
I think there's a lot of time that people give, and the generosity that encompasses philanthropy isn't always monetary. It often manifests in volunteering for an organisation, and that can be anything from front of house volunteering to board engagement. And yeah, I think it's beyond that kind of value that you mentioned, Caroline. I think that it's all encompassing, and that it's really about that generosity that's infused across the sector. I mean, we've been remarkably there have been so many acts of generosity, from Matthew Burrows' Artist Support Pledge to, you know, people like Claire was saying earlier, giving time, and art packs being distributed and packaged up by organisations for refugee communities, for example. So I think there's a range of things that don't necessarily cost in terms of high value that people can do that contribute to the philanthropy space.
Absolutely. And I think that point of the philanthropy and the value and how it's transferred is not only the arts organisations with their audiences, but between the arts organisations themselves. And I think we've seen some really heartening examples. And I would say a shift and a return to an old sense of ecosystem under COVID-19 that I've really sensed is missing. And I'm wondering, I don't know if you can comment on this, but as you make the decisions regarding grant funding, will you be encouraging organisations to do more in terms of that arts ecosystem and to continue to support each other in the way that's been so heartening under COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, I think our Let's Create strategy kind of that we published at the start of the year kind of presented the need for greater collaboration, greater partnership. And so as we see more and more organisations sort of revisit their business plans in relation to Let's Create, but also the current situation, I think that we will see more collaborations. I mean, some of that work will potentially have to happen in terms of mergers, greater partnership working. But I think absolutely we've seen examples where organisations have worked with different delivery partners, particularly social welfare organisations, wider charities such as homeless charities, and actually seen the real value in that work and what value the arts and culture can have in terms of well-being and community. And so I think there will be a greater sense of that work going forward. But also I think, you know, donors are not a homogenous group. You know, they're all individuals, and they will all have their different triggers in terms of what they want to support. And they won't be just putting their support in one area, they'll be looking across whether that's a place or many different kind of areas. And I think, you know, they will start to demand greater collaboration and partnership working as well. So when I said about it, how important it is to listen to donors, I think listening and responding and demonstrating how you are working in greater partnership and collaboration is going to be really important too.
Absolutely, and I think that we've seen some good leadership from large organisations who are likely to get major investment, and I think that for me that's great, and I'd love to see it continue as that major investment is made. Kerry-Ann, do we have questions from the chat for Claire and Helen?
We do have some questions from the chat. We've had, what's been interesting on the chat today is we've had a fair amount of response around people's experience of the Catalyst Evolve scheme. So we had Hester Cockcroft of Awards for Young Musicians, just sharing how much of a positive experience it was for them. she said that recruiting their first ever development manager was great. They already had a strong fundraising culture and a diverse income base, but having a dedicated post was a real game changer for them. She also said that the double your money message, as she put it so nicely, worked really well for them and their supporters. And Anne-Marie from the Plough Arts and Pentabus Theatre Company also, and a number of others, agreed with that statement, saying that the match was really helpful in terms of encouraging individual donors and actually just acting as that real catalyst for that funding. So Hester particularly asked, would ACE consider some kind of annual match funding challenge akin to the Big Give? I appreciate that's a very difficult question to answer from this position, but is there a universe in which there could be any kind of continued match funding available, or is that something that you feel organisations should be looking to invest in funding?
So during this current time, as many of you will know, we stopped our project grants application portal, and we absolutely refocused all of our support onto the emergency funds, because for us it was about supporting the sector, whether that's individuals or organisations, to get the funding that they needed to stabilise. And across the organisation, we are looking at what we do to further support the sector at this time, and also starting to think about what we do in the future. Now, I mentioned that we'd published our new strategy at the start of this year, and in about April, May, June time, we were going to be publishing our delivery plan as to what we did in response to our new strategy, how we were going to make decisions about investments going forward. And because of the current situation, we've delayed that. And quite rightly, we need to listen to the sector, we need to see where the sector is and then respond. So absolutely, all of your kind of encouragement and good messages about how great has been will help, I think, to kind of make the case internally about future work, but it's impossible to say right now as to what we'll do. But I think what is really clear is that, you know, the value of investing in organisations to build their capacity, and the incentive of the match giving can really help an organisation to kind of move forward and refocus its work and generate that greater level of income from private sources, which we know helps them to deliver crucially more work, but also to balance risk as well.
Absolutely, thank you very much, Claire. We have one more question if we have time, Caroline.
Yes, I think so. Go for it, Kerry-Ann.
Great. So we have a question coming in from Vicky Grace at the Royal Court. She's keen to understand your thinking around fundraising, recruitment and workforce, particularly around attracting new candidates and supporting those in post, particularly given the extra fundraising challenges ahead. She's really conscious that it's going to become more important given the potential increased pressures ahead.
Yeah, I think there are so many organisations that are having to make incredibly difficult decisions at the moment about staffing, ongoing operations, and they are working in a situation where the future is so uncertain that I think, so we have to recognise that what you can maybe plan for now isn't necessarily going to work going forward. I think what the important and what I would hope is that organisations see the real value of fundraisers within the organisation in terms of that case for support, the messaging to their audiences, and how valuable investing in staff and recruitment in fundraising posts is. Certainly one of the areas that I touched on earlier was about diversifying donors, but also in terms of our wider diversity work in relation to philanthropy, we've really been working with the Institute of Fundraising and also our other sector support organisation, Arts Fundraising and Philanthropy Cause 4, to support organisations in their training of staff, in recruitment, and particularly looking at how we can support fundraiser career pathways. I've blogged in the past about how organisations can sometimes go out to recruit a fundraiser with lots of experience, and how difficult it is at the moment, given the market where we're at for fundraisers, but actually how looking internally at individuals within the organisation that have particular skill sets, and what a difference that investing in an individual can make for the organisation rather than recruiting somebody external. But the Institute of Fundraising has also been exploring work around how to increase a greater inclusivity, diversity and representation within the sector, actually using their networks across the Institute of Fundraising to see about bringing in individuals from other sectors as well, which is quite an interesting approach. So I think greater investment in fundraisers and ensuring that commitment to training and development is really important. And I just hope that organisations can see the longer term benefit of investing in staff and continuing to do that. I think I'll make one final comment because I know that we need to move on very quickly. There is a wealth of resources out there, and it doesn't have to cost money. There's so much learning that can be gained online. There's peer support networks, and I really urge people to kind of reach out to those networks and find those sources, and we'll be sharing more of them over the coming weeks as well. But really urge people to kind of use what's out there and talk to one another as well.
Super, thank you so much, Claire. And Kerry-Ann, I'm conscious that this is so much to talk about, but I think we have to move to our words of wisdom from a sector leader, the golden nugget.
Absolutely, I completely agree. So it's over to you, Sarah.
Hello everyone. So today I'll be exploring how we might consider the notion of democratizing philanthropy. How do we redefine the broad understanding of who and what a cultural philanthropist might be? Looking to the future, I believe we need to review the term philanthropist, removing perceived barriers and allowing all access to the term and to their power. Philanthropy is an act of intent. Some past understandings of problematic colonial associations, as well as a simple fetishization of the elite. This is a disservice to its true nature and a disservice to the possibilities of the act. As per today's conversation, we know that the future of philanthropy is much broader than this. With the brutalities of COVID-19 and the deaths of George Floyd and many others, a razing to the ground of past norms has a potential to take place. Certainly, communal empathic action is edging to the fore. If empathic or at least sympathetic impetus is the foundation for philanthropy, in this moment we have an opportunity to embrace the natural philanthropic instinct within all of us. Whilst high net worth individuals are an incredibly important and valued part of our infrastructure, let's open this space and our attention up. Disparities in the sector have been discussed today, and indeed in reviewing disparity between the 50 biggest brands and the rest of the sector, this shows that aside from anomalies, we're lucky to find many big donors outside of those larger organizations. At this time, incoming data, for example, Alva's recent report, demonstrating that altruistic desires are highest amongst young people, and some practical innovations are occurring that point us toward new trajectories. On one end of the scale, NT Live now asks for donations at the end of screenings, proactively exhibiting their charitable status with an advocating an alternative call to support local theatre. On the other end of the scale, artist-led peer-to-peer funding has risen through social networks, and thus, here lies my golden nugget. Once we've established the way we're collectively communicating our need, we know much of society still isn't aware of our economic models and believes that arts are simply state-funded. I believe key to democratizing philanthropy lies within two main concepts. Number one, a radical and proactive campaign engaging with meaningful practices of inclusion. How do we diversify the people we engage with, generating and developing relationships between audiences in the industry that go beyond transactional functions? And two, the concept of design iteration processes in our work here. As discussed, let's aim but not wait for perfection. Let's keep trying things, prototyping, testing, consulting our communities. Let's be honest and open and humble when things fail. Let's learn and try again. We now know just how rapid the world can change. With those 2 points in mind, what provocations can we contemplate in our own worlds in order to collectively move toward democratizing philanthropy? In this new world, you might not yet see this new wave of cultural philanthropists, but we see you. And so here I pose a non-exhaustive list of practical prompts. What can we do to reach people in our community who may have different educational, cultural, or socioeconomic backgrounds? How can we use technology to share and learn from our audiences and peers locally, nationally, and internationally? How are we communicating our work in a meaningful way to different age groups? What assumptions might we be making of them? How can we honestly and proactively assess and respond to the diversity or lack thereof within our own companies and organizations? What minds and bodies do we have on our boards, our stages, in our offices, or visiting the box office? Who's missing? Like the eruption of a volcano, we may have had warning signs. Of course, the creative industries don't exist within a bubble. We're part of a much larger economic picture. But the current or perhaps past economic models in place within the cultural sector, from independent artists and cultural workers through to internationally renowned institutions, have been exposed as precarious at best and cruel at worst. Let's not let losses be for naught. I hope that what we're left with is a new and fertile ground to think about what we're doing and why, how we're doing it and who we're doing it for. By expanding and welcoming new voices at every point of engagement, including and especially at the philanthropic level, we can contribute to rebuilding our communities and our industry into one that can be more robust for future generations and that must be more reflective of who we all are. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And what a beautiful way to end our Achates Live today. Kerry-Ann, over to you to wrap everything up, if you would.
Thank you so much. And just, yeah, to echo that, Sarah, those were absolutely fantastic words to wrap that up. And I think, I'm not sure that you were aware, but that chimes with some of the conversation that was happening over on the YouTube chat around diversity in fundraising professionals as well as in philanthropists. And I think that's a key conversation that hopefully we can pick up next time. So our session next time is on the 14th of July at 2 p.m, streamed live on YouTube as ever. That session is on maintaining a commitment to diversity. We look forward to seeing you all there. It just remains to say thank you so much to Caroline as ever, to Claire Titley from the Arts Council, and also to Helen Cooper from the Arts Council, and to Sarah Maguire, our Achates Philanthropy Prize trustee and independent dance producer, for her wonderful golden nugget at the end there. So with that, we will sign off and we look forward to seeing all of you same time, same place on the 14th of July. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.